I, 20 men's, was always the odd one out in my family. My dad is the kind of man who believes in one path only: study hard, get a degree, work 9 to 5, retire quietly. My older sister's in finance, my cousin's in med school. Me, I dropped out of college to start an online business. The night I told my parents, my dad didn't even flinch. He just looked up from his plate and said, "You're a damn failure." No emotion, no concern, just a cold statement, like he was giving a weather report. "You're throwing away your future for some internet scam," he added, stabbing his steak like it offended him personally. My mom stayed silent as usual. She always played peacemaker by disappearing into herself. It wasn't like I was failing school. I actually had decent grades, but deep down I knew college wasn't for me. I'd been building a dropshipping store from my dorm room, researching digital marketing late into the night while others were out partying. I finally felt like I was doing something meaningful. But my dad didn't care about meaningful. He cared about status, about bragging rights at family dinners, and apparently I wasn't giving him anything to brag about. That night, I left the house with just a backpack and my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just walked out. My friends thought I was insane. No degree, no job, no backup plan. But I had one thing stronger than all that: the fire to prove him wrong. I spent the next year couch surfing, working side gigs, dog walking, food delivery, washing dishes, anything to stay afloat. Every spare moment went into my business. I studied ad algorithms, tested product pages, stayed up debugging Shopify themes until my eyes burned. There were nights I went to sleep hungry, too broke to buy instant noodles, but I didn't quit, because every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice: "You'll never be anything." Eventually, something clicked. One of my product videos went viral. My site got flooded with orders. I reinvested every dollar, scaled fast, and within 6 months, I was making more per month than my dad made in a year. I never posted about it, never told a soul. I wanted my silence to be louder than any flex. And then, something wild happened. I came home one weekend to visit my mom. She'd been begging me for months, and overheard my dad on a speakerphone call. He was talking to a friend, complaining, desperate, about to lose his job after 30 years at the company. That moment, that was the spark. I realized that the man who once called me a failure was now one desperate phone call away from being jobless, and he didn't even know that the failure he kicked out was now sitting on a small fortune. Right then and there, I knew what I had to do. Not just for me, but to make sure he never looked down on anyone again. Growing up, I always felt like I was auditioning for a role in my own family. My dad never said, "I love you," not once that I remember. Praise, forget about it. The only time he looked remotely proud was when my sister got accepted into her Ivy League school. Me? I was the creative one, the daydreamer. He used to say that like it was an insult. I remember when I was 15, I built a simple website for a local mechanic. I charged him $80. I was so proud. When I told my dad, he just scoffed and said, "Don't waste your time on that computer crap. Real men work with their hands." That sentence stuck with me for years, and the irony? He worked at a desk job in corporate sales, but somehow, in his eyes, everything I did was soft, pointless, or just a phase. He micromanaged everything: what I wore, who I hung out with, what subjects I picked in school. And every time I tried to speak up, it turned into a lecture about how kids these days have no discipline. My mom was the quiet type. She'd defend me when dad wasn't around, but in front of him, she shrank. I think she was afraid of him too. The whole house felt like it was ruled by one person's mood. It got worse when I graduated high school. I didn't want to go to college right away. I wanted to take a gap year to explore freelance work and online business ideas. He lost it, said if I didn't enroll, he'd stop supporting me financially, so I caved. I enrolled, took up business administration, thinking maybe it would still let me carve my own path, but it was soul-crushing. None of it felt practical. It was all theory, all fluff. Meanwhile, I was learning 10 times more from YouTube tutorials and online courses on e-commerce and digital marketing. In my second year, I started building a dropshipping store on the side. At first it was slow, barely any sales, but I loved it. I loved tweaking ad copy, testing new product descriptions, watching the analytics. It felt like I was building something real. One night, I stayed up late working on a product launch. I skipped a family dinner. My dad barged into my room, yanked the laptop cord out, and yelled, "I'm not paying college tuition for you to play tech guru. You're wasting your life." That night broke something in me. Not because of the yelling, I was used to that, but because I realized I was never going to be enough for him. No matter what I did, he had already made up his mind about me. I was the disappointment, the underachiever. A few weeks later, I made the decision, dropped out, packed my bags, told him over dinner. His reaction? "You'll come crawling back, broke, begging." And maybe I believed that at first. Maybe a small part of me thought he'd be right. But after I left, something in me snapped. I stopped chasing approval. I started chasing results. I stopped on couches, worked double shifts, ate dollar menu meals. I learned everything I could about sales funnels, ad psychology, supplier negotiation, and brand. Slowly, the business started to grow. I started making small but steady sales. Meanwhile, I'd hear updates about my dad through mutual contacts. Still working the same job. Still judging everyone from his high horse, still acting like he had it all figured out. But I was changing, evolving. I built my first $10 K month, then $20 K. I started consulting for other small online stores, helping them scale. Word started spreading. Still, I said nothing to my parents. No calls, no texts. I wanted them to wonder. I wanted silence to do the talking. Then came that weekend. I went back to visit my mom. She missed me, and I missed her too, even if I hated the house it came with. While she was out getting groceries, I heard my dad on the phone, walking around like he owned the world, until his voice cracked. "No, I haven't told her yet," he said. "They're letting me go in 2 weeks, downsizing. 30 years and just like that." He sighed, sounding more human than I'd heard in years. "We're going to have to dip into savings. Maybe the boy can help, but he's off somewhere, wasting time." I froze. He had no idea. No idea I had built a business worth more than what he'd made in his entire career. No idea I was the one person who could help him now. And in that moment, I realized the tables had turned. He still thought I was a failure, but I was about to show him just how wrong he was. After that phone call, I couldn't stop thinking about it. All those years he made me feel like I was nothing. Now he was about to lose everything. And he had no idea I was sitting on enough cash to buy the house he lived in twice over. I didn't say a word that weekend, just smiled, ate dinner, let him talk down to me like usual. He still saw me as the failure son who'd burn out any day now, but I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I wasn't going to just move on and live my life in peace. No, I wanted him to feel it. To experience what it was like to be powerless, to be judged, to be underestimated. So I came up with a plan. The first step, make sure I had full control over my finances and business assets. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up every detail, LLC paperwork, trademarks, offshore savings, business insurance. I wanted to be untouchable if things got messy. Then I started doing some digging. A mutual friend mentioned my dad was in talks to launch a consulting firm with 2 of his buddies. Some last-ditch attempt to survive after the layoff. I did some research. Turns out they were trying to bid for a government logistics contract worth 6 figures. But here's the kicker. They needed a digital infrastructure partner to qualify, someone who could handle the back-end tech, e-commerce integration, and digital reporting tools. You know, the stuff I do better than anyone. They were desperate. And their deadline was tight, so I created a shell company completely separate from my personal brand. I registered it under a friend's name, built a sleek website in 2 days, stacked it with fake case studies and testimonials, and pitched it as a tech integration firm specializing in government solutions. Guess who reached out to us within a week? Yep, my dad's team. He had no idea who was behind it. My voice wasn't on any calls, and my friend handled all the meetings. They thought they were hiring a lifeline. In reality, they were signing up for the ultimate ego check. I gave them a pitch too good to resist. Customized dashboards, integrated supply chain software, seamless API reporting, the works. quoted them a discounted rate just to sweeten the pot. They agreed immediately. My team started working on their site and internal systems, except we weren't building what they needed. We were building what I needed. I carefully inserted fail points into the system, bugs that would crash during load testing, auto updates that would break under real use. And most importantly, I kept the source code encrypted and locked behind my company servers so they couldn't modify anything without us. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my dad. He was still walking around like he was king of the world, still making jokes about kids who think making money online is a real job, still bragging about how his new firm was going to dominate the consulting space. He had no idea the clock was ticking. 2 weeks before the government presentation, I gave them the final system, told them it was fully operational, told them everything was ready to go. Then I waited. I'll never forget the day of the presentation. I was on a video call with a supplier overseas when I got the message from my friend, "They're in. Software just glitched, mid-demo, panic mode." I pulled up the live stream on the internal channel. There he was, my dad, sweating bullets in a conference room, trying to explain why the software kept crashing. His voice cracked. His partner tried to recover the pitch, but it was over. The board members looked unimpressed. One of them even said, "This feels rushed, unprofessional." They were denied the contract on the spot. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of coffee, and smiled, but I wasn't done. A few hours later, my friends sent them a formal termination notice from the shell company citing internal misalignment and project security concerns. Professional, clean, and devastating. My dad called me later that night for the first time in years. "Hey," he said, "I know we haven't talked in a while, but things have been rough lately." I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, I heard. Sorry to hear about the contract." Silence. Then he asked the one question I had been waiting for. "Any chance you can help? I know you've got the tech stuff going on. Maybe you could look at the system for us?" I let the silence hang in the air just long enough to make him squirm. Then I said, "I thought I was a failure." He stumbled. "No, that's not what I meant. I was just trying to push you, make you stronger." I wanted to laugh, but instead I told him the truth. "I built the company you hired, the one that tanked your deal. I designed the system, and I broke it." He went quiet. "You spent your whole life tearing me down, telling me I was nothing, so I showed you exactly what nothing can do." He hung up without another word. The silence after I told him the truth was deafening. "I built the company you hired," I had said, "the one that tanked your deal. I designed the system, and I broke it, and then..." Click. He hung up. No yelling, no arguing, just quiet retreat. It was the first time in my life my dad had nothing to say, but I knew him well enough to know the silence wasn't surrender. It was the sound of his ego cracking, trying to piece itself back together. The silence of a man who'd spent his entire life preaching control and dominance, finally realizing he had neither. I figured that would be the end of it, that he'd sulk, disappear, maybe go back to pretending I didn't exist. I was wrong. 3 days later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded anxious, like she didn't know how to even begin the conversation. "He's not doing well," she said quietly. "He's been pacing around the house, not eating much, barely sleeping. He keeps going into the garage and just sitting there." It was strange to hear about my dad being still. He was always loud, always moving, always controlling something or someone. Now it sounded like the man was unraveling. "He lost everything," she added. "The contract was his last shot. The partners backed out. Word is spreading." Apparently, the failed government pitch had done more than just embarrass him. It had blacklisted him. No one in his network wanted to touch him. They called him reckless, unprepared, even delusional. Investors pulled out of side projects. Speaking gigs dried up. His LinkedIn, once filled with motivational quotes and leadership fluff, went dark. And in all of it, he still hadn't reached out. Not until a week later, I got the email at 2:17 a.m. It was short, awkward, a feeble attempt at reconciliation wrapped in corporate lingo. "Hey, I know we've had our differences, but I'd like to meet, talk things out, maybe start over. We're both businessmen now, right?" It made my skin crawl. He still didn't get it. Still thought this was about ego, about competition. Still thought I'd been chasing money, status, his validation. He had no idea that all I ever wanted was one thing: respect, not dominance, not power, just basic human respect. And when he refused to give it, I built my life in the absence of it. I thrived in the silence he left behind. But I also saw the opportunity. There was one thing my dad still held on to, his prized cabin up north, his legacy project. A quiet place he had been remodeling for retirement. He always talked about escaping to the mountains, fixing it up with his own hands, maybe even passing it down one day. That was the one thing untouched by his downfall. So I made him an offer. I told him I'd buy it at double the market value, cash. No agents, no fuss. He replied instantly, said it would really help him and Mom out right now. I knew he'd never say he needed it, but the eagerness in his reply screamed desperation. Just one thing, I added. I want to sign the deal in person. At the cabin with Mom there. There was a long pause before he replied, okay. The drive up felt surreal. I hadn't been there in years. The last time I visited, I was a teenager, still trying to impress him, still hoping he'd see me. Now I was arriving as the man he swore I'd never become. The place looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down, but still beautiful. It hurt in a weird way, knowing how much he loved it, how much it meant to him, and knowing what was about to happen. He greeted me at the door. His face looked tired. Aged in a way stress can accelerate overnight. There were dark circles under his eyes, his shirt was wrinkled. His voice, for the first time ever, wasn't loud. We sat at the wooden table inside, me, him, and Mom. I laid out the papers. He barely read them, just signed. His hand trembled slightly as he passed them back. Then I placed the check in front of him. He stared at it, then looked at me. This is a lot. You sure? I smiled. I've got more where that came from. Silence. He nodded, swallowed hard, and folded the check. And then I said what I had come to say. You know, I began, you spent most of my life calling me a failure, telling me I was wasting my time, telling me to grow up. He didn't respond, just stared at the wood grain of the table like it might open up and swallow him. And yet, everything you mocked me for became the thing that saved me, while everything you clung to, your rules, your status, your pride, turned out to be fragile. Still nothing, his shoulders slumped slightly. You didn't raise a failure, I said, standing. You just couldn't recognize someone building a future you didn't understand. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. I saw something in them I never thought I'd see. Regret. Real, raw regret. I'm sorry, he finally whispered. I nodded, but I didn't say, I forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As I walked out the door, I turned back one last time. This cabin means a lot to you, I said. He nodded. Well, now it belongs to the failure. And with that, I left him sitting at the table, check in hand, surrounded by everything he once thought would outlast me. But in the end, I was the one still standing. Story 2. Me and my GF have been together for 2 years. I always thought she was very sweet and kind, and I really appreciate how much she loves me. And while she sometimes got a little jealous, I didn't think it was a big deal. Hell, maybe I even enjoyed being doted on like that. It made me feel really attractive, which I never really felt I was. Recently, we attended a work event organized by my company, and we met one of my coworkers there. She works at a different branch, and we hardly ever talk outside of work emails and calls, but we get along well enough. This event was my GF's first and only time meeting this coworker. On the way back from the event and the following day, my GF was acting a little weird. She kept asking me about a work wife and asking FI. I thought that coworker was pretty and other stuff about her. I knew my GF could get kind of jealous, and I did my best to calm her down. No, that woman isn't my work wife. I don't follow her on any socials. I don't even have her personal phone number. I don't think she's more beautiful than my GF, and I am happy with my GF, etc. And she seemed to relax, and things got back to normal. A few weeks later, out of nowhere, I got a follow request on IG. My account is private, from my coworker. I approved and followed back. Her account is also private. That account was almost nothing but a few pictures of her in swimsuits, uploaded very recently. I haven't checked at the time and didn't really scroll her account at all. It didn't look like anything overtly sexy, just normal vacation pics. It seemed weird, but I didn't really care. Then a few days later, she DM'd me on IG. It was just small talk, and I replied, but it wasn't flirty or anything, AMO. She kept reaching out every few days, and eventually it did seem to get kind of flirty. I told her this felt inappropriate and I was in a relationship and I'd appreciate if we kept things professional, which she seemed okay with. My GF seemed extra affectionate the days after that, and while I didn't suspect anything in real time, you can all probably see exactly where this is going. Still, at the time, I was happy, and my GF even seemed to be better regarding her jealousy, but then last week I got a follow recommendation on my IG. It was my coworker's account. This one wasn't private, it was just a normal IG account, and looking through it, that was where those swimsuit pics came from. Here they were just a part of her normal IG account, which contained mostly normal pics and not just swimsuit ones. I then put 2 plus 2 together. Before confronting my GF, I talked to that coworker at work and asked for her IG account, and she gave me her normal one, which I followed, and indeed she gave no indication that we ever interacted on IG before. So it became clear I was being catfished. I confronted my GF then, and at first, when I was trying to be subtle, she denied everything outright. Then she shifted to gaslighting me about it and saying it was just a prank or that it was a test or that because she was cheated on before, she just needed to know that she could trust me. I told her that her being able to trust me was great, but how am I supposed to trust her now? She said that made no sense and kept deflecting no matter how I tried to explain, going so far as to question how I even knew it was her if I wasn't cheating on her with my coworker. I told her that this was unfair and manipulative, and that I needed some time and went home. She's been texting and calling since, saying that I'm ruining a great relationship over nothing, I'm overreacting, and that when I finally realize how much she loves me, it might be too late. And it's not fair for me to throw everything we built out over some skank, but that just feels incredibly manipulative to me and like she doesn't get what she did wrong at all. So I'm conflicted between wanting to just cut and run and giving it another go after all we have been happy together for 2 years, but also, can trust be rebuilt after something like this?